And LNG. So, I mean, maybe we'll start though, just giving a little background on yourself. You're with Resource Works. It's a BC-based group, though you talk about energy issues across the country, and particularly LNG lately. What else is your focus, I guess, could you say?
LNG is a big part of it because gas, whether it's produced in Saskatchewan, Alberta, or BC, gets to markets and influences our way of life in lots of positive ways. It creates a huge amount of income for governments to support social programs, and that is a profitable thing for businesses to engage in. It creates a lot of employment. So that's a good thing. We also work for better awareness of mining opportunities. Pretty much every politician right now is talking about critical minerals, which is great because that's the EV, the electrification future. We need those. But you know what? We also need the more traditional, old-fashioned, if you will, minerals that have been used for thousands of years. Minerals like coal, like copper, molybdenum, silver, gold. All of these things are a huge part of the Canadian economy. So the problem right now is that it takes often decades to build a new mine. And at the pace that humanity is looking for solutions to the need for everything in their lives, we need to produce those. And right now, the regulatory system is not creating conditions for new projects to be advanced. Same thing in forestry, we see that too. Here's a renewable, almost the ultimate renewable building product. If you're building a house or we're using products made of paper, we're not allowed to have plastic straws anymore. They have to be paper. Well, that paper comes from trees, right? And those have to be grown and harvested, managed, and then processed into the things we use in life. We also look at the coasts, things like aquaculture and fishing. So all these things, you put it together, you say that's a natural resource economy. And 10 years ago, we started for the purpose of building awareness of how these are, first of all, fundamental, even today, in the way of life that we enjoy. Whether you're working up close or you live in a city, it doesn't matter. You're just as dependent. And we've had economic studies galore that have proven this on having that economy. Hey, it's not always glamorous or the dazzle that some people want, and that's fair. But you know what? It's still fundamental to our way of life.
Yeah, so with resources, I'm glad you said that. You know, it's a broader thing. And the one we're hearing the most about in the West in general, though, and that's, I think, one of the, even speaking on particularly this time around, but every resource development area is suffering from that regulatory regime and some ideological challenges going on. And so the liquid natural gas, that's a really growing world industry right now, and Canada is really well placed. I mean, we have a lot of resources, but boy, we're having a hell of a time trying to get infrastructure in place so that we can take advantage of that and export it. I mean, that's part of what you've been explaining over in Ottawa this week, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I just listened to the CEO of Enbridge, Greg Ebel, tell a room of policymakers and people who pay attention to these things that it's not a question of building things. You know, if we want to build infrastructure, he said that a pipeline to the East Coast could be built in 18 months. It's not a question of whether we have the ability. Of course we have that. Alberta, above all, has that. It's whether we have the regulatory certainty to attract investment and get those decisions made. That's what's tying us up and leaving us in knots as a country.
Yeah, well, something that's been difficult. I wrote on that recently too. I believe there was 18 or 15 proposed LNG terminals over the last 10 or 12 years, and only one is really under full construction. At least, thankfully, that one looks like it's going to be going. The ones all on the east end have all been shut down, and the others people have basically backed away, not for lack of a market, but they just can't feel confident that they'll get a return on their investment. How are things going, though, with the CGL line? I mean, that's something I think any potential investors are watching carefully. Like, can this even get completed? If we can't even get that done, I can't see any future ones being constructed.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much question as to whether it will get done. We did see today in the news that TransCanada has announced some additional cost overruns on that. It's now, I think, 10.6 billion US that we saw this morning. That may have some impact on investment intentions in regards to owning the stock and what that means. In terms of will that asset be completed? Yeah, for sure it will be completed. It's probably 80% done. And now they're in a phase where they're building sort of the more difficult stuff. The terrain there is unbelievable. You go from that run that there's the final leg down to Kitimat. You're talking about high mountain passes. There's even an aerial tramway like you see at a ski resort, but I'm sure built for the incredible weight of pipeline components that had to be constructed to position some of these pieces. That's what we're talking about in this terrain. The costs, one can only guess given the price escalation It's more expensive to feed people. Any family knows that. Well, imagine you're feeding 5,000 people at a work camp somewhere on the CGL line or at LNG Canada. All that has to be paid for, and no one anticipated this. So costs are going up, sure, but so is every family's costs. So I don't think that is the big thing. It really does come back to the regulatory certainty. We also don't need to debate the idea that this is a useful commodity. We don't need to debate whether the world is going to pay a premium for it, because long-term contracts, 20-year contracts are being signed. If that wasn't happening, we could debate that, but there is commercial interest in securing these molecules. So all that's left really is for politicians to say, okay, I can do this. And we saw some good news today from a pollster. We had Abacus pollsters who are kind of well regarded in Ottawa for being able to put things together in a way that reads the political times we're in. And I thought the top line number for me was that the impressions of LNG among a coast to coast sample that was a very solid polling method that no one would challenge, I don't think. They said that the impressions of LNG among Canadian residents are 43% positive and only 34% neutral, and then a small number like 9% negative. Very few people in this country are against it. So if you're seeing in social media, in your feeds, you're seeing things come up, don't do this, don't do that, or this horrible toxic polluting. No, that does not reflect what Canadians think.
Yeah, so beyond what our common Canadians think, how's your reception been with the political class in Ottawa this week? I mean, as you've been explaining this, does it sound like some pragmatism might be finally kind of sinking in for some people and realizing that they've got to change the regulatory scheme?
Well, I think there's always been plenty of people in Ottawa, just not the right ones, who are holding the stick to get things done. And looking across a room of 100 or so policy wonks today at lunch, I thought there was a really good cross section of that world. Most Canadians, the vast majority of Canadians, vote either Liberal or Conservative. That's 80% of MPs. That's most of the country. So if you look at that group, they're in the room. And the problem is, I think, for the Trudeau PMO, that's love them or hate them, they're in their way trying to figure things out politically so that they can accomplish whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. And I think it's really important for them to know that when you look at the numbers and what Canadians think, that you can not lose votes today by supporting LNG. That's what we heard from the pollster who explained this. You could pass all the regulations needed to get pipelines built and LNG plants approved, and that's not going to cost you power. I think that's really important for politicians, not just federally, but also in BC. That's where a lot of really important decisions are going to affect a next wave of decisions. We've had 10 years, Corey, 10 years of inaction. You go back, you talked about the 15 projects that, most of which never came about. A couple more of those can go forward so that we don't have a second lost decade. I mean, that would be the tragedy, that having seen what can happen, or not happen, I should say, in 10 years, we go into another decade and come to the same result. That would be a true travesty and loss for Canada.
So I mean, one of the areas that opponents to hydrocarbon development like putting out, and I see that your group, Resource Works, put out a good report on that is subsidies and incentives. I mean, people like saying, oh, oil companies are just pulling in all these subsidies, and it's costing Canadians a fortune to keep maintaining hydrocarbon development and these things. But I mean, there's a lot of misinformation kind of going on when people talk about what's a subsidy or what isn't, or how much is actually going into the energy sector, if at all, in some cases. I mean, it's tax deferrals and things like that, but it's kind of a complicated area for people.
Well, let's simplify it. If you're seeing that message coming at you, just ask the question, is someone trying to affect me by making me hate big business? Are they trying to take things away from personal responsibility? Because you could equally say of these things, oh, it's Joe and Jane down the street, they're causing this problem because they want to have a warm house. They want to have a car that can take their kids to school. Those people are evil. You could equally say that. But instead, we have the lobbyists who are pursuing the extermination of Canadian opportunity, who are saying big business is trying to get something for nothing so they can get all these profits. Well, I think anyone, whether you don't have to be a small business owner or a manager in a company, you just have to manage a household budget. I mean, everyone who plugs in that way knows this. if you're just pointing the finger at someone else and saying, oh, it's on them, right away, we can be suspicious of that. It's about personal responsibility. So when I see these subsidy arguments, it's not about subsidies. Actually, the Ministry of Finance in Ottawa has gone through all the so-called subsidies, and they've removed them. They'll tell you that. What they have, though, are incentives. And in public policy, without getting into the weeds on this, it's an instrument of every government to encourage people to do things that the government prefers them to do and not do things that government would rather they don't do. And that's how taxes are used. That's how all kinds of policy instruments are used. And that's normal. But what's happened is the anti-fossil fuel activists are taking instruments like that and pretending that they are subsidies. They're painting them as these sort of free handouts when really they're anything but. And that's, I think, important to understand if you're hearing this stuff. It just doesn't add up, this argument.
No, we hear it a lot, and it's just a hard one to counter because it's easy to throw it out there and just cause the doubt, and it takes a little while to explain to somebody, putting off taxes when they're putting in a heavy capital investment on something like an oil sands mine doesn't mean you're giving them a check or cutting them money. It just means that you're not taking from them until they start bringing a return in on their funds. But the disingenuous way that they paint that as a subsidy causes a lot of mistrust with a lot of our energy sector industries, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, next door to Alberta and BC, there's a spending spree going on the social priorities of the new Premier Eby. He will be going to the polls, no doubt, at some point to get his own mandate to run a government. For now, he is obviously seeking to make his mark by spending on housing and healthcare and all kinds of social programs. You might ask, well, where's he got the money? Well, it turns out he's got a ton of money because high natural gas prices have produced a bounty of revenue for the BC government, and he's spending it. So, for someone in David Eby's position, and he hasn't become famous or, influential or powerful by being seen, supportive of industry, he's more with the kind of social, environmental, urban crowd that got him in. I think someone like that, if you're running a Canadian province, any Canadian province, at some point you need to be practical and pragmatic about things because it's about the people. It's not about the politics. And to serve the people of British Columbia, any premier will have to recognize that you need to have the money coming in so you can spend it on whatever it is your priorities are. If that's housing, affordability, then do that. But you need to acknowledge where it comes from.
Yeah, well, reality always sinks in in the end one way or another. But it'd be better to have foresight rather than being forced into it.
You got that right, Corey.
So before I let you go back to the land of the Ottawa crowds over there and making the case, is there more you'd like to share with our viewers today before I let you go?
Yeah, I think we have in Alberta an enormous amount of gas, an opportunity to be part of that. I think that if someone's listening, call your MP's office. That's what a lot of pressure groups do, whether they're organized or unorganized, and tell them something because the staff, take that down, and they may not, put it in the hands of the MP right away, but they, it's their job to do that. We might feel like we're just individuals and can't influence anything, but we can call our MPs and tell them what we think about things and try to have some notes about what you want to say and make sure it makes sense and do that. Just take a minute or so to do that, or write them a letter or send them an email.
Great. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, when there are electoral butts on the line, it's amazing how receptive they can get. The reality is they do follow public opinion. We just have to let them know what we want to see. And your website, it's ResourceWorks that you're at. Is that resourceworks.ca? I'm sorry, I don't know.
It's resourceworks.com. And thanks for showing it on the screen there. What you see there is a little clip of my recent presentation, again, here in Ottawa. I come here quite a bit nowadays. At the Standing Committee on Natural Resources, where I talked about a number of things, including a little country of Qatar. At that time, the World Cup was on. I noted that this country was basically able to pay the $220 billion tab for hosting the World Cup because of natural gas exports. Most of it is LNG, and we could be just as competitive. We could be a superpower of energy like Qatar is, but we've chosen not to be, which is a lost opportunity. And we can change that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for coming on today, Stewart, and I'll let you carry on with that important work.
All right. Thanks.
Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99 a year for unlimited access.